So in this lecture, I'm going to talk a little bit and introduce and some of the key ideas from the environmental psychology approach that applies mindfulness to pro-sustainability behaviors and relationship with nature. So some of the key assumptions operating in this literature is that the first one is that the problem is the blind spot. That is, human beings have a tendency to deny or be ignorant or kind of not even be part of the paradigm where humans belong to or exist as part of nature, that we are part of nature. Because I think there is this assumption that we control nature, and I think that's the fundamental kind of a difference where taking a more scientific paradigm, and I'm a big believer and proponent of science, so it is not a judgmental observation, but a descriptive observation of taking a more positivistic scientific paradigm. What happens is then we kind of decide that we control nature because we've unlocked the secrets of nature and physics and chemistry and biology. And so we forget that we are actually part of the natural environment. So it is not that we are above or over, but we are to some degree actually at the mercy of nature, because planet Earth, Mother Earth, provides for all of us. So what then that means is there is a cognitive split between humans and nature. So when we don't think of ourselves as part of nature, then our brain processes nature's and the relationship with nature differently. And in fact, more and more research suggests that um, younger children raised in the cities do not really develop a kind of an intrinsic emotional connection with nature. And the assumption also in this field is that it is critical to establish a harmonious relationship between man and nature. And the next one is my own work, which is that how we define ourselves, and that is our identity shapes our choices. If we define ourselves as embedded in a ecological context, and if in our definition includes our relationship with nature and all the creatures and sentient beings, and then that defines how we move in the world and how we make choices. And again, theoretical foundations and supported by neuroscientific discoveries is that connectedness to nature also has two components. One is the affective, which is the emotional component, that like how do we feel, and there's a lot of research that being in communion with nature increases a sense of well-being. uh, and then the cognitive, which is belief centered, like what do we believe that our relationship with nature is. So sometimes it is colored by our own religious or spiritual beliefs, and sometimes it is humanistic kind of an approach. But the thing is that both the top down, which is the cognitive, and the bottom up, which is the affective or the emotional arousal, both play a part in our connectedness to nature. And the mindfulness approach targets the core beliefs and values, and also put you in that moment of experiencing the emotional connection with all things around us, and all people and all creatures around us can in turn shape pro-social and pro-sustainability behaviors in people. And finally, a lot of the climate change and climate justice work comes from and rightfully moral righteous anger and a sense of urgency and a fear-based approaches, whereas the mindfulness approach to sustainability takes a more positive emotions approach. And we've talked about how positive emotion attractors tend to unlock flexibility and hope and curiosity, and being able to step outside one's comfort zone, much more than negative emotions, which kind of locks us into a rigidity that comes in the way sometimes of difficulty. Again, both are essential. We need to have a sense of urgency around it because it's real, and we need to have a sense of moral righteousness around it because there are communities, that have borne the brunt of the omnivores that we talked about. And so but mindfulness does take a little bit of a different approach, and that actually where positive psychology and cognitive psychology supports that approach for change. And so I wanted to share a few of the interesting research on the topic. One is that Wang et al. From Michigan State University Psychology Lab have kind of shown that mindful learning can actually enhance connectedness to nature. So, which means they did an experimental study, and then Barbaro and Pickett in 2018 publications show that mindfulness increases pro-environmental behaviors and observing. From the five facets that five facets of mindfulness, especially the two facets, the observing and non-reactivity, are critical aspects in this relationship between mindfulness and pro-environmental behaviors, the kind of decisions you make on a daily basis. And since it's an environmental psychology, it takes that approach. And the specificity of mindness is a very interesting thing. The mindsets, if it is very specific, that is concrete rather than very abstract, it actually facilitates much more of a change in concrete behaviors. And Giger and their co-authors actually in 2019 did a meta literature review and talk about the challenges that there is not much of there are not that many experimental studies that will clarify that this is correlational versus causational. And so they have talked about how it's important to continue to do more research on this topic. And finally, Wamsler et al. Talk about the need to move between levels. So they've developed a very nice conceptual framework on sustainability and pro-sustainability behaviors, where we need to look at how mindfulness can actually help, because mindfulness can help in fostering individual well-being at the individual level. That in turn actually, people tend to stop or at least pause mindless consumption when they're feeling good, because we know that when people they're not feeling good about themselves or good about their lives, they tend to soothe that self-soothing behaviors through consumption of unnecessary things. And so they're talking from an individual level to a global level. Application of mindfulness can have a reverberating impact. And so it's a theoretical model, and I think there are a lot of potential to do more detailed research on that. So this is another area where the environmental psychologists done a lot of work on application of mindfulness in climate justice, environmental justice, and pro-environmental behaviors area.